You can learn to speak fluent dog, decode monkey gossip, and translate the chirps and rattles of snakes. The language barrier between humans and other animals might not be as wide as you think. Every day, scientists are discovering new ways that creatures communicate with each other, and some of these methods are surprisingly close to how we do it. But while we might understand what they're saying, do animals understand our languages? Some species of dog can learn to answer to their names when called, but understanding human speech goes far beyond that. Dogs can pick up on changes in our tone of voice and facial expressions to get a sense of what we want from them. And dogs aren't alone. Some birds can figure out which calls indicate the presence of predators based on the context of the situation. Animals are taking subtle cues from their surroundings to better understand what words mean. That's called learning by imitation or social learning. And it's mostly been observed in primates, birds and cephalopods like octopuses and cuttlefish. But we're finding that many more species are capable of it, even animals that aren't closely related to one another. So while we might not always know what our animal friends are saying, they probably know a lot more about our language than we give them credit for. A flock of starling flying in perfect unison might look graceful, but it takes a lot of work to maintain that synchronized flight. Each bird has to constantly keep an eye on its neighbors and make small adjustments to stay close to them. Starlings rely on visual cues to guide their movements, but they also use sound. If two birds fly close enough together, they'll produce a low rumble as air passes between their bodies. Scientists have found that these rumbles actually play a role in keeping the flock cohesive. If you turn off the birds' hearing, they still try to line up with their neighbors, but they end up much more spread out. They rely on the rumbles to know where to position themselves within the group. Even if you don't speak starling, you can see that this is a pretty effective way of communicating. These vibrations are basically a tactile signal, one that tells each bird, "Hey, I'm right here." In fact, this isn't the only example of animals using vibration to send messages. Male blue whales produce low-frequency sounds that travel through the ocean floor and can be picked up hundreds of miles away. Those rumbles can last for hours, and scientists believe they reuse to attract mates and communicate over very long distances. It's like a whale version of singing a love song. But getting back to starling murmuration, there is a potential downside to this kind of communication. When you're sending information through sound, there's always the risk that someone else might eavesdrop. For instance, great tits in England have developed distinct alarm calls for predators that are on the ground versus those that hunt in the air. That way, other birds in the area can take steps to protect themselves. But if there's an imposter in the flock, it could trick everyone into sounding the alarm, putting the whole group at risk. And as it turns out, Eurasian jays, which are known to sometimes eat baby great tits, have figured this out. They can imitate the alarm call of great tits, causing other birds to flush without actually being a threat. This means great tits have had to evolve an entirely new system of calls and notes to make sure they can still warn each other of danger without tipping off potential predators. But some species have come up with simpler solutions. Scrub jays tend to ignore the alarm calls of great tits because they assume that predators do pose a threat to them. Other birds like coal tits don't respond unless they hear the exact note that corresponds to a predator they themselves have experienced before. In that case, they've learned to tune out all of the noise that doesn't concern them. And that's not the only way animals filter out background noise. Honeybees can remove the buzz of wind from their communication. Their hive is always filled with background noise as bees fly in and out. But honeybee foragers remove the low rumble of the wind from their dance language. That way, the other bees can focus on the parts of the dance that actually matter, and they can share the most important information about where the nearest food source is. And dancing isn't the only creative way animals communicate. When male red deer are ready to mate, they put on quite the show. They stomp their feet, shake their heads, and lift their legs up in the air. And it's not just a mating ritual, it's a way for other males to size them up. Male red deer are larger than females, but they also have longer, more elaborate antlers. The more impressive the male deer's display, the more likely it is that the other males will leave it alone to mate with the females. That way, the dominant male doesn't have to waste energy fighting off rivals. Everyone knows who the boss is. And red deer aren't the only ones that communicate through coordinated movement. Many species of birds engage in synchronized behaviors that convey messages to their neighbors. For example, when zebra finches are approached by a predator, they jump up and down in unison. This flash mob of flailing creates an unpredictable, chaotic look that confuses the predator, making it harder to catch any of the birds. And it's not unusual for animals to use coordinated activity to confuse predators. Schools of fish often move in a group so that if a hungry predator wants to chow down on one of them, it will have to contend with all the others. And this makes it easier for the fish to escape. It also helps that some animals can release chemicals that confuse predators. When threatened, bombardier beetles spray a noxious chemical from their abdomens that obscures the vision of any insect that gets too close. Meanwhile, mammals like spotted hyenas and mongooses release a pheromone that interferes with the ability of predators like lions to track them by scent. Animals can also communicate through art. That's right. Some species create structures to convey messages to their neighbors. When male gibbons find a promising fig tree to set up shop in, they'll use their long arms to pull leaves and branches together, creating a shelter for them and their future offspring. That sends a message to nearby gibbons that this fig tree is already taken, and there's no need for anyone else to move in. Sometimes animals even add personal touches to their homes to communicate. Male jewel beetles will rub a particular part of their body against the inside of a leaf that they've chosen to mate in. This creates a pheromone trail that lets other beetles know that this is a prime mating spot. And female jewel beetles can even identify the males that created the pheromone trails left behind by previous beetles. Some species even take their communication underground. Honeybees build combs made of beeswax to hold their eggs and store pollen and nectar. But the orientation of the comb tells you something about the colony. If the comb is vertical, the nest is underground. If it's horizontal, the nest is above ground. And colonies that have recently stung a human will tilt their combs vertically to warn off other humans. That's just one example of how these little insects manage to communicate complex information. They can also tell each other the direction of a food source simply by performing a little waggle dance. Bees move in a straight line when they waggle, and the angle they take tells you the angle of the food source relative to the sun. So if the bee takes off 30 degrees to the right of vertical, the food source is 30 degrees to the right of the sun. And the duration of the waggle run tells you how far away the food source is. A longer waggle run means it's farther away. We might not be able to do the bee wobble, but there are a few things we can do to show our love for these fuzzy friends. Insects aren't the only animals that communicate with dances. Humpback whales perform elaborate breaching and slapping behaviors that could be part of courtship rituals or a way to identify potential mates. Even animals that don't seem like they'd have much to say can surprise you. At least 64 species of frogs can communicate by drumming. They either smack their feet together or hit their bodies against surfaces like leaves and twigs. It's usually the males doing the percussive performances, and they tend to be louder than the females. In some species, bigger males have lower frequency drums, and this could help females find mates more easily. It also seems to be a way for males to advertise their health. After all, a healthy frog is going to have more to say. So whether your closest animal relatives are beetles or blue whales, there's a good chance they have more to say than you realize. We might not always understand what they're saying, but the more time we spend listening, the more their languages will start to make sense. And as it turns out, They might be able to teach us a thing or two about communicating with each other along the way. Speaking of teaching, I love learning something new every day, and that's a great way to describe the experience of taking brilliant courses. They're always adding new interactive lessons to help you explore your interests and expand your knowledge. With a diverse catalog like this, you're bound to find something that sparks your curiosity. Whether you want to brush up on your math skills or learn about the fundamentals of computer science, each brilliant course is designed to be as engaging as possible. You can trade places with friends, swap perspectives on a problem, and even compete for the best solutions. Brilliant really makes learning feel like a game, and that's a win-win for everyone.